Dr. Aisha, one question. You had
Go ahead.
خرج and then منهن لتنذر به. I know ذكر you connected it to the مؤمنين. لتنذر, did you say anything about the
I'm
disbelievers?
still going to say that. I'm still going to comment on this part. We're
Oh,
just
thank you.
in the word
Thank you.
haraj. Right.
Continue. Okay, keep going.
Inshallah. So,
Thank
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing what we had been starting off with last class, which basically is yesterday. So let's see, just to summarize what we talked about yesterday, we said Surah Al-A'raf basically is 206 ayahs, just like you could see right there. We also went over the translation, kind of like a rough translation, and we called it horrible translation because it was too surfaced and not really giving the accurate meanings. We did recommend Quran.com as a Quran translation right there, and we basically went over the different translations, at least for some ayat. We didn't yet necessarily go over everything, so we went over part of it. And then we also talked about the word haraj. And we said there are three main meanings for the word haraj. One is narrowness, and two is doubt, and three is sin. And we talked about each and every single one of them. And we said what acts as an antonym to the word ha-ra-ja is sha-ra-ha. And we basically went to the ayah, فَمَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ وما يريد أن يضله يجعل صدره ضيقا حرجا كأنما يصعد في السماء. All right, so we talked about these two contrasts, and we also compared it, or at least we went to Surah Al-Sharh for a detailed, at least, basis for an ayah that would give me these three words, at least these three meanings. We're talking about narrowness, we're talking about doubt, we're also talking about sin. So we talked about these three, and we talked about Surah Al-Sharh as a surah that demonstrates all the three meanings and how we implement it, at least in life, and how we understand it in a way that that helps us basically understand all the meanings. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep every haraj from us. And we went in further tafsir with Surah Al-A'raf in Tafsir al-Qurtubi. So we went with this ayah, with this hadith, وروى النسائي عن عائشة أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم قرأ في صلاة المغرب بسورة الأعراف فرقها في ركعتين. So the Prophet ﷺ himself, one time, read Surah Al-A'raf, the whole surah in Salat al-Maghrib, but split the surah in two. We also talked about Alif Lam Mim Sad, basically these letters that come in these separate forms, and we talked about, at least in summary, talked about the meanings, or at least the scholars and what they had said in regards to the meanings for these letters. We also did, I would say, somewhat of a long commentary on the part about حروف الجمل, or basically the arqam for al-jummal, basically those numberings, and making every single letter basically have a certain number, whether using it for magic or whether using it for tafsir, or basically talking about the history of it and how Jews basically use these numberings for abjad, hawas, hutti, kalamun, etc., in order to create somewhat of their own, let's call it, they considered it a back-end reading, and they considered that that's a way to create a reading for the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we commented on that. There was a question that I didn't answer when someone asked, what about things like al-i'jaz al-adadi? Is there such a thing as the miracles in numbers? So if you look at the ayat, for example, you will see The number of times that perhaps dunya was mentioned is equal to the number of times of akhirah. The number of times that women were mentioned and the number of times men were mentioned, etc. All these different things. There's no harm in speaking about that, but many times I was really obsessed with that, especially during my undergrad. And I would say sometimes those numbers are and what people might actually calculate. Sometimes they're a little bit exaggerated, and sometimes they are accurate, and it is very, very miraculous. So you will see, for example, the number of times water was mentioned versus land, and then they'll look at the ratio of land and water on earth, or they'll probably look at the number of ayat, and for example, the letter noon missing in that surah, or that letter missing in this one, or just outstanding. That was really outstanding, at least looking at those numbers and studying some of them. I'm somebody that is really doubtful of any information that comes past me unless I do some thorough investigation. So I was really obsessed with this I'jaz Adadi at one point, but do not go to the extreme of wanting to count everything in or every single word. And sometimes it's definitely very exaggerated. Sometimes, not always. And sometimes they'll even make up things thinking that they're doing the Quran a service. No, do not lie about the Quran, because you are then going to be making the Quran as if it is lying. When you want to make an information, you make it based on credible resources, credible and truthful information, and do not create information to think that you're doing service by somehow making people look at these numbers and believe these numbers, and thinking that people are not going to go over your claims, and then thinking that you're doing a service. You're not doing a service by making this up. All right, so we talked about Alif Lam Mim Sad, and we said that most of the times when you look at these letters, that it will either talk about al-ayat or it will talk about the kitab. So whether it's talking about the portion of the Quran or all of the Quran, at the end of the day, it basically is to at least perhaps maybe affirm some of what the scholars had said, that these letters are to let basically people know to pay attention, that this is what this Quran is made of, basically from these letters, and certainly this is the kitab that contains all the ilm that basically has the wahi and the inspiration that was sent onto Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so this is where we left off at yesterday. So today, to continue with Haraj, we went to this hadith. He said, that is al-Qurtubi, he said the ayah when it said كتاب أنزل إليك فلا يكن في صدرك حرج منه لتنذر به وذكرى للمؤمنين. Let's just give a surface translation really quick first. كتاب أنزل إليك, this is a book that was, now the word is أنزل. When you say أنزل, we talked about this in detail, to actually mean it was sent down. Sent down, and not necessarily reveal. When you say reveal, it would seem like something was not visible and then it became visible. But the word unzila, anzala, nazzala, it is clearly giving us a definition and a clear word that it was something from up to down, that we are down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is up and that it was sent from up till down. So this is extremely important to basically put the dimension in place because the words that were chosen were wanting to emphasize that there was a certain dimension. And I think it's fair that we would give at least the most accurate translation in order to give the expression, the information that the ayat themselves are speaking of. Okay, فَلَا يَكُنْ if there so there that they'll so that there will be or do not have within your chest. And I want you to look at the word chest that it was used. It didn't say qalb, it was chest. In other words, the qalb itself was not affected. This is important. فلا يكن في صدرك حرج منه لتنذر به وذكرى للمؤمنين. So the qalb itself containing al-Iman did not get affected, and which is very important for us to know that this is not talking about the Prophet ﷺ having, let's say, dhiq or narrowness or depression that affected his faith. It didn't affect his faith. It did not affect his faith. That's why it said fi sadrika harajum min. What is it? Haraj? And we said it's either going to be doubt, or it's going to be sin, or it's going to be narrowness. So right here, this is not talking about sin. Why not? Why doesn't it talk about sin? So, because when it says لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ, this one is telling us that it would not make sense if we are saying that he would, in your chest, that there would be sin, and then you would have to warn others. So this isn't a sin. This is talking about narrowness within. This isn't doubt either, because he wasn't necessarily doubting Allah, but yes, he was doubting the trajectory of where this basically is going to be affecting them. In other words, are they going to accept it? Are they not going to accept it? Are they going to oppose me in a way that might even harm me? What is going to happen? Certainly, there was that doubt, but not doubt in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why you would see later on how some scholars actually said, or they debated whether il-haraj here is to mean doubt or whether it is to basically mean narrowness. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. So you had some scholars actually saying, no, we disagree. It was doubt, but it wasn't doubt. And they said, وَلَيْسَ هَذَا شَكُّ الْكُفْرِ. They said this was not doubt to mean that he was doubting to mean getting out of faith. So this wasn't the type of skepticism as misconceptions, but this is the shakku dhiq. This is basically as due to stress, it was the anxiety that he was going through as a result of what their opposition was looking like that was making him doubt whether it will affect them, whether it will influence them, whether he is doing his job in delivering the message. Okay, and that's why those scholars that said that this is talking about it was a narrowness, it was an anxiety that was leading to that type of doubt in what this is going to affect them in. And that's why that ayah says, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. So they said, look, we've got the ayah to prove this. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hijr, and we know that your chest is narrowed for what they had said. So they said, here it is, يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ, and certainly this is talking about narrowness in the chest, and this is also talking about as doubt as a result of that narrowness. Okay, and of course, In another ayah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said basically the same idea, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ in Surah Al-Kahf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, for you may be affecting yourself in a way that is causing you to be stressed. لعلك باخع نفسك ألا يكونوا مؤمنين in Surah Al-Shu'ara. You may be stressing yourself because they are not believers. They're not embracing the faith. So you're becoming right now stressing yourself in a way that is affecting you and affecting your ability to even continue. And this is extremely important. In other words, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know, that your reward is not necessarily determined by how many people are accepting the call, or how many people are accepting to probably embrace Islam, or probably embrace the truth. That at the end, you did your job. This is what you basically are rewarded for. You're rewarded for doing the job, and not necessarily for how people would embrace your job. Keep that one in mind. All right. And this is very important. So we should not doubt, and we should not necessarily let the different responses or the opposition let us lose our enthusiasm from giving da'wah. You give da'wah, and you will be rewarded for that da'wah that you're giving, regardless of how people embraced it, or how people reacted to the call, or to the da'wah that you're doing. This is extremely important, because many times we would feel discouraged from continuing when we see people are not necessarily embracing our da'wah, or taking it seriously. Or perhaps you're trying to raise your children right, but then your children are basically then developing a new will that you definitely right now perhaps cannot control to force their will. So in that situation, just remember, you were rewarded for trying to raise them right. You are rewarded for trying to put the different pieces in order to bring about Muslim children, to bring about children that have taqwa, girls that have the hishma, etc. That's what you try to do. But at the end, if they make a different choice, that's not something that will be what you will be accountable for. You're not accountable for that. Okay, now, so if we say فَلَا يَكُنْ فِي صَدْرِكَ حَرَجٌ مِّنْ لِتُنْذِرَ بِهِ. So in other words, do not have that narrowness, that doubt, to basically let it affect you from doing your job, which is to warn the disbelievers. So let's see. Is this discourse, is it directed at the believers, or is it directed at okay, so the sister's asking, Surah Al-Sharh, the commentary, is it yours? And when you interpret, was it done loosely? If you mean loosely, mean spontaneously, right? So that was yesterday. So it was, yes, it was a spontaneous sharh, and it was really swift. It wasn't necessarily detailed, but it was a fast sharh. It was not detailed. It was really to bring about a clarity, more like a commentary on what we were trying to explain in the word haraja and dhiq, and how that basically relates to Surah Al-Sharh. So that's what we mean. We did not yet go to Surah Al-Sharh and explain it in details yet. That was just a fast thing to help us understand the meaning. Okay, so the discourse, is it directed at the Prophet ﷺ, or is it directed at the mu'mineen? So let's see. Scholars actually had differences of opinions. So the first group, they basically said that this is directed at the Prophet ﷺ, but it is also inclusive to include the Muslim nation as well, and even the different later nations as well. So this isn't exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, but this isn't exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, but it would be inclusive to every single person that is doing da'wah. So don't give up, continue, and don't necessarily let it affect you to feel that it's not working, they're not accepting, what am I going to do? Maybe I should stop. No, you continue regardless of their reaction. You continue giving in, you continue giving da'wah, you continue saying what is right, regardless of how people may react to it. But pause for a second here, because I want to take you to Surah, let's just remember this is 160. I want to take you to Surah Al-Rum for a bit. And in Surah Al-Rum, there's a very important thing here. And when you want to do that da'wah, it's very important that you do it in a way that is also not going to be affecting your dignity. Let's say it that way. Okay, let me see right there. I want you to look at this one. فاصبر إن وعد الله حق. Here it is. Okay, فاصبر إن وعد الله حق ولا يستخفنك الذين لا يوقنون. I want you to look at this one. So فاصبر, what are you going to do? At the end of the day, you need to have this patience in delivering the da'wah. And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promises, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words are real, are the truth. وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. But do not get dragged, and this is important, do not get dragged. Why did I use the word to get dragged? Because of the sin and ta right there. The root is khaffa or kha-fa-fa. Okay? But of course, يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ, they are seeking to drag you to be a person that is vulnerable, a person that lacks dignity, a person that lacks honor. So do not let your da'wah take away the honor of what you are standing for. This is extremely important. Definitely do da'wah, but not to the extent that you get dragged into what they want you to be in, which is you losing honor, you losing dignity, and those are basically the people الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. The ones that do not have certainty are the ones that basically lack seriousness. So they don't really care. They basically are so lavish, and they would create a sarcastic conversation every single time. They would make a fool of you, and they would make themselves basically just comedians, just laughing at you, all of that, thinking that they can basically drag you in. We could see a lot of times people that would want to do da'wah, they end up basically in that trap and end up really being dragged into their lifestyle, into their culture. So we would see comedians, Muslim comedians, trying to defend Islam, but then they would be using, I would say, bad words, and they would be using a language that is not fit with the Muslim behavior. They would probably change their hijab in order to appear fitting with their culture. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Stand with your taqwa, stand with your Islam, have that Muslim pride. Do not get dragged to their type of a sarcastic behavior, sarcastic and uncertain type of let's say rhetoric. Do not get dragged within that area. And this is extremely important. Many times we would get dragged thinking that if I use their method of talking or their method of communication, that somehow I will gain more acceptance. Not necessarily. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to maintain the Muslim honor, to maintain the Muslim etiquette, to maintain basically the Muslim pride and not get dragged within their area and within their akhlaq of lacking certainty. When a person lacks certainty, they'll basically make fun of everything. They'll be comedians. They'll be just making jokes and cracking jokes of everything because they lack certainty. And they'll be making fools of themselves and fools of others. But for a Muslim, no, you take their matters seriously. You're not going to be dragged in their area of behavior and actually making everything as a joke. Do not joke about everything. Do not, when it comes to the religion in particular, do not whatsoever joke about it because it is a serious matter. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ. It is to warn. Why? Because we're speaking about akhirah. We're speaking about nar. We're speaking about Jannah. We're speaking about serious matters here. It is not a joke. It is to warn. It is to, when you warn somebody, what do you warn of? You warn of something that is critical. You warn of something that is dangerous. You warn of something that has direct harm upon you if you do not embrace whatever somebody is warning you of. So it makes no sense to be a person that is cracking jokes or a comedian and at the same time doing this type of warning. Makes no sense. They don't go together. If you are warnings of something and you're being serious about it, then your heart will tremble whenever it talks about it. That's what it means, لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And it is a reminder for the believers. So why a reminder? Why for the disbelievers it's basically لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ and ذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ? And is that necessarily what all scholars would say? We're going to see it right there. So some scholars actually said لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ is whether al-inzar, so whether the warning or whether the dhikra, it's both for the mu'mineen. That's the first opinion. How? Because only the mu'min will feel warned and will take the warning seriously. If a disbeliever is listening to you and they take the warning seriously, then they're going to be basically saying their shahada. If they take it seriously, that means they recognize it. Okay? So that's the first opinion. The second opinion said, well, no, لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ, al-inzar is usually directed at the disbelievers because for the mu'min, it is not warning them of shirk, but it is warning them perhaps of sin, not of shirk. Because for a mu'min, they're already embracing Islam, supposedly by definition, then they're going to be away from shirk. All right. So لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ, that was the second opinion. The second opinion, لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ, was for al-mushrikeen, and ذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ was basically a reminder for the believers. So what's the difference between the two? لِتُنذِرَ بِهِ is more of two types. Okay, the difference is inzar. It can be inzar to basically warn of Judgment Day, to basically warn of hellfire, to warn of the day of Hashr, the day of resurrection, to warn of all these details. Okay, that's an inzar. And that could apply to believers as well. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ, we would see the Prophet ﷺ warning the ummah to Ya Fatima taqillah fa inni la ughni laki min Allahi shay'a. Oh Fatima, telling his daughter, have taqwa, because I will not be capable of interceding for you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will so, basically. This isn't necessarily, an accurate translation, but فَإِنِّي لَا أُغْنِي لَكِ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا. If I wanted to do a literal translation, oh Fatima, have taqwa, for I will not be of any supporter without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to you. In other words, your true supporter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not me. Your true victory, your true place of salvation is through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not me. Even though as a prophet, I am your father, but I will not be capable of giving you salvation without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. True salvation comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically what that hadith is saying. The Prophet ﷺ telling his own daughter. So al-indhar can be indhar, meaning in this dunya, that this is basically a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so take it seriously, and can be indhar in detail, can be also warning the details of what is coming up, whether accountability, hisab, or whether al-hashr, resurrection, or whether al-qabr, death and grave, or whether yawm al-qiyamah with all its details there as well, or dhikra lil-mu'minin. Dhikra is a reminder. Dhikra can be a reminder. The root dhakara, just put that right there. The root dhakara, so when we say to do dhikr, I want to look at this one. The root dhakara basically means to remember. Let's write that down, okay? It can mean to remember. Let's right there. So it can mean, oops. Okay, here we go. To remember, or it could also mean to repeat. Okay, repeat. It could also mean to mention, okay? And when you look at these meanings, to remember, to repeat, to mention, all right, those are generally the meanings of the word, the root dhakara. So when we say dhikra, in that harmony, dhikra, that is to also to mean to remind. Why to remind dhikra? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. So in that ayah, it is basically telling us that it is within your instinct, within your DNA, whether they had found it or not, regardless of what they are right now finding in terms of science. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that it is part of your nature, part of your makeover, part of what was created in you, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you according to that ayah. When your Lord Almighty had taken from the backs of Adam and basically his children, all right, and he made them witnesses upon themselves, am I not your Lord? And they responded, verily you are. Now, do we remember any of this? We absolutely do not remember any of this, because your definition of remembrance is based on the data that your brain collected. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's definition of remembrance is not necessarily the data that your brain collected, but the data that is carved within you, that includes your DNA, that includes your instinct, basically the information that you have within you, even if you may not remember it. So, for example, you do not remember whatsoever, probably, and have no information whatsoever, seven generations before, and what happened there. You don't know any of that, but it is within your DNA. And they could do you with just a DNA test, even if you're somebody that was found on some random island, and they'll be capable of just dissecting and getting some basically some parts of your body, and they'll be capable of knowing your ancestry, some information about you, with probably your eye colors and probably certain information, even though they didn't necessarily get you to say it, but it was basically, let's say, restored data and stored data within you. And that's the thing. So dhikra is stored data, but what you are doing when you listen to the revelation and when you listen to the wahi, you are basically getting that data restored. You're getting that data reminded and brought to your attention because that data is already within you. So you are ذكرى للمؤمنين. This data of Quran is basically reminding you and bringing to your attention the data that is stored within you. That's number one. Number two, ذكرى للمؤمنين, because the Quran itself is a كتاب أنزل إليك. If it's a كتاب أنزل, then that actually means that it's something that we have to work on repeating. We have to work on basically taking the time to remember it, to repeat it, to basically read it over and over again in order to have it basically be, let's sharpened in our mind, sharpened in our identity. There's no way that you can sharpen the light unless you keep giving it energy. So the Quran would be the energy that would brighten this dhikra, this data that was stored in you. And the third meaning is to mention, because the root ذَكَرَ also means to mention. So it's something, it's not enough to just have that data stored within you, or you just remembering it and just sitting in some corner and trying to remember it. Yes, I remember the Quran. Yes, I remember my salah. No, there's something that you have to work on by repeating verbally and orally, because repeating orally has a certain vibration that will basically vibrate in your brain, vibrate in your heart, and it has its power. Okay, just like we were talking earlier. So we've got data. We also have energy. By repeating, you're creating an energy. But I don't want you to think of energy, the positive and negative energy that, the different people would talk about. That's not what we're talking about. But we're seeing here the power of dhikr. We're seeing here the power of dhikr. There's an energy that you have to basically do, which is right there by repeating. You're doing somewhat of a systemic pattern in order to repeat and repeat and repeat in order to keep it live within you. The third thing is that you're using a certain method, which is by mentioning, speaking the dhikr, speaking it by repeating the ayat and by simply reviving it within the mu'mineen. That's what a mu'min would do. Okay, let's see right there. So now what the question is, when we say fi sadrika harajun minh, so now, of course, Al-Qurtubi wanted to discuss the part about min, and what min means is basically from it. Well, we've got a pronoun here, it. So who is it? What is it referring to? That's where the scholars, they had differences of opinions. The first one basically was saying that this is, so كتاب أنزل إليك فلا يكن في صدرك حرج منه. It was a book that was revealed upon you, so let there not be any narrowness or any doubt of whatever their response might be, and in whatever their response might be towards it. So the scholars that basically wanted to discuss the pronoun it, which is the hat right here in minhu. The first one, they said, well, this is relating to the Quran. The second one said this is relating to the warning. And the third one basically said, well, this is relating to their denial that is probable here. It was very probable that they were going to be denying all of what the Prophet ﷺ was delivering to them. So regardless, the idea is pretty much the same. The idea is pretty much the same. So regardless of how they would interpret the pronoun and what they think it is referring to, the idea is pretty much the same. All right, so فلا يكن في صدرك حرج منه, and just the word min, regardless of the pronoun. And at the end is that whether this is harajun min al-Quran, and certainly to mean that you're afraid that they might oppose the Quran, that they might disrespect the Quran, or that they basically might not give the right response, or you're afraid for them, or whether this is talking about afraid of delivering the da'wah and how they may react towards you. The idea is pretty much all the same if you were to ask me, but it's, I guess, something that can give from different perspectives and different areas. I did actually want to talk about this hadith. Let's look at this. All right. So it was narrated in, I don't know why Al-Qurtubi used the part of speech ruwiya when this was actually narrated in Sahih Muslim. And especially as Qurtubi and as Maliki, and they revere Sahih Muslim more than Sahih Bukhari. They in fact consider it even better. And certainly, he memorized Sahih Muslim, so for sure he knows that it is in Sahih Muslim. But I'm going to mention this hadith. So let's see that the Prophet ﷺ was afraid, and he said even in the hadith that we will see in just a bit, hadith Qudusi, that his response, إني أخاف أن يثلغوا رأسي فيدعوه خبزة. I'm afraid that they will smash my head and make it like a smashed piece of bread. So the Prophet ﷺ was definitely afraid of what their response might look like. But I thought it would be a good idea to know that portion of that hadith is taken out of a longer hadith. What is this longer hadith and what really happened? So let's see, the sister is saying in a private chat that doubt the narrowness that Prophet ﷺ experienced. Was it a type of anxiety where he was afraid to take the action because of the response or the outcome? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds him that he was in control, the result, the guidance, dhikr, your commentary, Allah yarda Rabbi. Okay, so let me explain this one. So the Prophet ﷺ definitely, as we would see in the ayat, that the Prophet ﷺ was definitely feeling some sense of anxiety, some sense of sadness in regards to their response. There's no question about that, which is why we would see the ayat literally saying فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. So there's no doubt that the Prophet ﷺ was going through a sense and a stage of worrisome. He was very worried that their response might not basically be a pleasant response, and in fact it may be very violent, as in this hadith is basically clear about the Prophet ﷺ himself, speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, what if they smash my head? What if they do this to me? Because we already know, we don't know at the time, did the Prophet ﷺ, was he aware that of what the Bani Israel had done to Prophet Yahya, for example, when they had literally smashed him and cut him into pieces using a saw, or whether the way that they had reacted to Prophet Musa, or we don't know exactly like the information that the Prophet ﷺ had at the time, but we would know that at the time, based on the words that we would say in the Quran and the Sunnah, that the Prophet ﷺ was understanding that his words may provoke a very strong sentiment, a very violent response. We could see that in the hadith, in the ayat, that the Prophet ﷺ himself wasn't feeling safe to deliver the message. He was not feeling, and certainly he wasn't feeling safe, even when he had fled from he wasn't safe. When he had fled from Mecca to Medina, he had to take the route to Ghar Thawr, which is really, south of where he was supposed to be going. So he was supposed to be going northwards, but he took south in order to basically let them lose the trail and lose them and get them lost. And definitely the Prophet ﷺ was afraid, but the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Ghar Thawr and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was with him, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq basically was shivering because they were very close. In fact, they were at the door, at the entrance of that cave. But then the Prophet ﷺ basically يقول صاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا. Do not be in sorrow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. So that's when, just like Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي, and I had built you, or I had disciplined you to basically carry out my mission. That's the same thing. That's not just for Prophet Musa, but that's also for the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had disciplined the Prophet ﷺ. So all of that is and when we say discipline, we're not just talking about an outer discipline, because discipline goes farther. And I absolutely love Surah Al-Muddathir. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. Those are two disciplines. It's that inner discipline and it's the outer discipline. رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. You glorify your Lord. You basically connect with your Lord Almighty. That's رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. ثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. You purify your clothes. You discipline your outer self, and that's another type of discipline. So there's no question that the Prophet ﷺ was afraid, and that he was basically also, and when you say fear, you're talking about that affecting a person feeling of course, feeling insecure, feeling worried about the trajectory of where this might actually go, what it might lead into, all of that. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ is a human being, so yet he did not know where this was going to where this was going to go. Now, let's take that hadith and let's look into this one. So the Prophet ﷺ, according to, let's see right there, this is the narrator. The narrator is Iyad ibn Himar. That's his name. Okay, Iyad ibn Himar. All right. Of course, just a note, I know Himar really means donkey, but you want to remember that, the Arab were very primitive, so they would name Jundub, they would name Himar, literally, and they would name Kalb, they would name dogs and cats and, snakes, like Uthman is a snake, all right? That's what the name means, or even Hudhaifa, which means a black duckling. So you're saying these names that really are animals, okay? But you want to remember that a society that is a primitive society, they used to name based on animals and what they had seen in animal and attributes in animals, because that's what they considered as a good trait. So if you're talking about Laith, you're talking about a lion, you're talking about Harith, you're talking about a lion, you're talking about, the different names that I had just mentioned earlier of a black duckling, like Hudhaifa, or a snake like Uthman, or a monkey, a wild monkey like May, for example. All right, not that I know a Sahabiya named May, but anyhow, all right. So you're looking at why would they use these names? Because they would see these traits in these animals, and they would think that this is an inspiration to perhaps maybe speed, or maybe power, or maybe hardworking, or maybe beauty, they saw in animals, each and every single one, they basically would see in animals a certain trait, and then they would think that, hey, let me give my child the inspiration from, I guess, a beauty of a snake, or probably how one animal stands out in patience or whatever, and then they would name it that way. But of course, when I named my son Hudhaifa, I didn't name him after a black duckling, but I named him after what the name Hudhaifa stands for, which basically is Hudhaifa ibn al-Yaman. Okay, Hudhaifa ibn al-Yaman or Uthman bin Affan. Right now, the name, no one says that the name basically means baby snakes. No one would say, well, that means baby snakes. It basically right now stands for this great idol, this great example, this great role model as Uthman bin Affan, and then that would be the inspiration. Okay, going back to this hadith, he narrated that the Prophet ﷺ, in one of the orations, you want to think of that this was a khutbah, whether it was khutbah for Jumu'ah, whether it was a khutbah for Eid, who knows what that khutbah and when it was, but we just know in one of the khutbahs, in one of those orations, he basically said, ألا إن ربي أمرني أن أعلمكم ما جهلتم مما علمني يومي هذا. He said, my Lord Almighty had ordered me to teach you what you do not know of on this day. Everything that I had given as a gift for any slave is basically permitted and halal for them to keep, basically. And وَإِنِّي خَلَقْتُ عِبَادِي حُنَفَاءَ كُلَّهُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had said that He had created all the servants as hunafa, as believing in God Almighty, or having, just like earlier we talked about the data that is stored in you. Part of the data that is stored in you is that you would worship one God Almighty, that you would recognize that there is a path to the Lord Almighty. There's a path of truth. There's a path that is leading you to basically Allah Almighty. That's the path that you are basically built to have within you. Whether you're a believer or you're not a believer, at the end, there's stored information to help you know the truth. But then, that stored information is not enough for you to find guidance, but that stored information is basically there and seeking, think of it as the light to give you that connection, because just by that stored information within you, you're not capable of getting the information about Allah Almighty or about Jannah or about Nar, because that is separated from you. This isn't something that you can experiment. Your brain is only designed to experiment, to basically calculate things, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside of your calculation, outside of your area of experiment. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the revelation and gave you with it that information, because it is outside of your scope and your brain scope to basically somehow maybe experiment. Is there God? Is there not God? This is outside of your scope to basically be able to get that information and experiment it. And it is outside of your ability to somehow get the information about Jannah, about Nar, because this is ghaib. It's outside of your scope. It's outside of your human capacity to get that information. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent down the revelation to help you get this information, but it is stored within you. It is stored within you to basically feel that there is something behind this creation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us for a reason. There is a purpose. Why am I created? All of that. It's basically stored within you, and certainly to turn to one Lord Almighty. All right. وَإِنَّهُمْ أَتَتْهُمُ الشَّيَاطِينُ فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِمْ. then the shayateen, they basically had come to them and فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ. فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ, it's kind of like they picked them. They segregated them away from their religion. So they basically separated them, or did they segregate them, or did the shayateen somehow, snatch them away from the religion? That's the word ijtala. Ijtala can mean to snatch, can mean to separate, can mean to basically can keep you away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within you. So in other words, it is exactly like saying you've got to store data within you, but the shayateen came in and either silenced or managed to get you pacified away from letting this stored data that is within you become vibrant and live within you. So the shayateen, they distracted you, and then فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِمْ, and then they basically separated you, snatched you away from the religion. What religion? The religion of Hunafa, the religion of being a Hanif. What does Hanif mean? So the word Hanafa actually means to be straight and turned away. Wait a minute. How do you become straight and turned away? Isn't that an oxymoron? Let me explain. So when you are straight to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the majority, you're basically the one standing out. That's what it looks like. You're the weirdo. You're the strange person. Why? Because you're not following their path. They would see you as strange. They would see you as basically that person that is Hanif. They would see you as standing out. Okay, so when we say Hunafa can mean that you're straight to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and away from their paths, from their delusion, away from their astray path. So فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِمْ وَحَرَّمَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ مَا أَحْلَلْتُ لَهُمْ. And how did they actually do that? So if I were to actually put the punctuation here, I would have actually put, instead of a comma, I would have put a semicolon. Why? Because أتتهم الشياطين فاجتالتهم عن دينهم. How did the shayateen come over and separate them or pacify them away from the religion? Well, that's why it should be a semicolon. Well, it basically used the method of regarding what is halal as haram. In other words, it reinterpreted what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as haram, reinterpreted for them as if it was halal. And they convinced them of the new narrative. They convinced them of the new of their basically method. And just like when Prophet Adam alayhi salam, when of course Iblis, he came to Prophet Adam alayhi salam, and he said, أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى شَجَرَةِ الْخُلْدِ وَمُلْكٍ لَا يَبْلَى. Should I not show you off to a tree that is the tree of eternity? He gave it a new name. And then وَمُلْكٍ لَا يَبْلَى, and basically gave it a new trajectory. And he said, well, this is going to lead you to having prosperity and creating basically new spaces and getting new privileges and all of these different things. He basically gave him a completely different name, completely different purpose, completely different trajectory, and made it into a completely new narrative. So when you look at the narratives, where do they start in basically creating that delusion? It starts with basically creating a new culture of halalizing what was haram. And this is extremely important. When we speak about believing in God or believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, certainly, somebody can be believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then their practices are off. We might say, I mean, they have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts. That's enough. But you could see in this hadith that the part about a person's behavior, your behavior directly affects your aqidah. And that's why this hadith is emphasizing this piece of it. The culture that you may be practicing and what you are embracing in terms of your relationship with the world around you, whether we're speaking about money or whether we're speaking about social relations or whether we're speaking about the different dynamics that you may be relating, what to consume, how to dress, all of that, it creates an identity that later will also have a certain projection, a certain influence on what is stored in your mind, what is stored in your heart, what is stored within you. It will be influenced by the behavior that you basically practice. So that's the same thing when we will say, for example, what you eat. Hey, you would say you eat an amount of sugar, you become hyperactive, for example, you eat a certain type of food, it basically influences your moods, it influences your activity, it influences the way your body is reacting, it may influence even your relationship with the people around you. It's how you consume and influences your deen. Are you capable of getting up and praying, or are you too heavy to even get up? So all of that it cannot be separated from the culture, whether we're speaking about food or whether we're speaking about social relations or whether we're speaking about what you're looking at, what you're listening to. All of that is considered a certain culture, a certain behavior, a certain dynamic that you had chosen to basically interact or had chosen to let it affect you. All right. وَأَمَرْتَهُمْ أَنْ يُشْرِكُوا بِي مَا لَمْ أُنزِلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا. And I had ordered them to associate, well, basically that, وَأَمَرَتْهُمْ, sorry, not أَمَرْتَهُمْ. وَأَمَرَتْهُمْ, that is the shayateen. They basically ordered them to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reveal in any credible resource. Not amartahum, but amarathum. Amarathum, that is the shayateen, they ordered them. All right. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ نَظَرَ إِلَى أَهْلِ الْأَرْضِ فَمَقَتَهُمْ عَرَبَهُمْ وَعَجَمَهُمْ إِلَّا بَقَايَا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looked at on earth, and I want to look at this one because if we were to take this out of context, it would definitely not be the right sentence, okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically looked at the people on earth and hated. So why would he hate them? No, it was because their actions were so distant away from the deen and away from the culture or the practices that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to be in. So that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had looked at them and had seen whether we're speaking about the Arab or the non-Arab, all were astray already, except a few from the people of the book. A few people from the people of the book, they had chosen to embrace the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he said, إِنَّمَا بَعَثْتُكَ. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this is a conversation between the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is basically now telling us what that conversation was basically like between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّمَا بَعَثْتُكَ لِأَبْتَلِيكَ وَأَبْتَلِيَ بِكَ. And I had sent you in to test you and even test others through you. Wait, why are we tested through the Prophet ﷺ? Are we going to believe in what he had basically told us about in terms of Al-Quran and His Sunnah? Are we going to practice it, or are we not going to practice it? So that's abtaliya bik. I will test them through you. You will be tested. Did you do your salah right? Did you do your social relations as based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said? What did you do? How did you relate to all of that? sorry. وأنزلت عليك كتابا لا يغسله الماء. And I had sent a book upon you that no water would wash away. Why? Because the book resides within. You memorize the revelation, it resides within. You memorize, you hold on to it. There's nothing that can take it away. And that's why it is encouraged that you would memorize the Quran. You would memorize the hadith. Why? Because a revelation is something that you carry within your heart. It is not necessarily something that is separate away from you. تَقْرَأُهُ نَائِمًا وَيَقْظَانًا, and you would recite it while you're resting in sleep or whether you are fully awake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, and Allah, now the Prophet ﷺ is saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَنِي أَنْ أُحَرِّقَ قُرَيْشًا. And the Lord Almighty had ordered me to burn down Quraysh. What? Burn them out, down, like just like that? No, this is talking about jihad after basically them persecuting the Prophet ﷺ and persecuting and doing whatever it takes to stop the message. That's when the Prophet ﷺ, of course, after they had persecuted the Muslimin and after they had done whatever it takes to stop the Prophet ﷺ from delivering the message, that's when the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to fight back and fight back Quraysh. فَقُلْتُ رَبِّي, and I said, oh Lord, then they will smash my head the way that people would smash a piece of bread. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I will expel them the way that they had expelled you. And I will fight them the way that they had fought you. And and I will spend on you the way that that they were spending for other than the cause of the Lord Almighty. And I will send an army, 5 times the army that they would send or that they would prepare. And you fight with those that obey you against those that would disobey you. And then he said, the people of Jannah are 3. 1. ذو سلطان مقسط متصدق موثق. A person that is in authority or in power, but they are muqsit, they are just, they would be donating, and they would be following the right path, in other words, steadfast. And a man that is رحيم رقيق القلب لكل ذي قربى ومسلم. And a man that is merciful, soft-hearted for every single relative and a Muslim. Certainly, your brother and sister, they may be the most ones that are picking on you and the most ones to know your shortcomings, and they'd be picking on you and they'd be knowing all the details about you, but then you would be rahim, you would be merciful upon them, you would be kind-hearted upon them, and this is for every single relative and for every single, towards every single Muslim. وَعَفِيفٌ مُتَعَفِّفٌ ذُو عِيَالٍ. And a person that is bashful. What is bashful? In other words, they may be in need, but then they refuse to ask for it. And that's muta'affif. What is al-muta'affif? Al-muta'affif is a person that is seeking to be a certain trait. So just like when we say إنما الصبر بالتصبر, the sabr, you're not just patient because you're patient. You're patient because you are trying to hold it in. You're extremely angry. You're extremely sad, but you contain yourself. Containing yourself is sabr. العلم بالتعلم. You're not born educated, but you go through the process of creating an atmosphere or at least an area, a path that channels you to become a alim. You put in the patience to get that ilm. You put in the patience to learn. You put in the time. You invest in money. You invest in effort. You invest in all that is needed in order to seek ilm. That's العلم بالتعلم. And here, متعفف. This person is not necessarily literally, being a person that is not in need. In fact, he is in need. Not only is he in need, but he's got children to cover their expenses, school expenses, perhaps maybe even rent and food and all of that. And they're trying to make up, probably divide the expenses. But then that's in order to avoid asking people to donate for them, asking people to give them money, or letting even people know that they're in need. They're just muta'affif. And then he said, the people of hellfire are 5. Number 1, the person that is vulnerable, la zabra lahu. What does that mean? A person that is vulnerable, a person, when we say da'if, we're talking about whether it's a poor person or whether it's a person that doesn't necessarily have a certain authority, but then la zabra lahu, meaning that they have no mind, no wisdom. That's what it means. Got no wisdom. So what do? الذين هم فيكم تبع. What does that person look like? They're just followers, or what we would say in slang, wannabes. They're just following what people do. They see people doing a certain behavior, they'll just do what they're doing. They'll see basically a trend, they'll follow the trend without even thinking about what does that even mean? But they'll follow a trend. Just like today, Gen Z, using their own language and thinking that somehow it's being smart and somehow it's being educated and somehow it's being standing out as cool. They're just تبع, just like قوم تبع. Even قوم تبع, it's, yes, قوم شعيب, most of the scholars had actually said, but right there, they're just followers. They don't even think of, well, why am I following this style? Why am I following this trend? And then, of course, لا يبتغون أهلا ولا مالا. They don't even think about the impact it has on their family or even on their wealth. They just follow the trend. They want to buy this type of car. They want to probably watch certain trends on social media, not even caring about the impact it has on their family, on their children, on their schooling, on probably maybe their future. They're just following the trend and don't even have anything serious to think about. Those are trivial people. والخائن الذي لا يخفى له طمع وإن دق إلا خانه. And a person that is treacherous, a person, every single time that they are wanting something, then of course anything that might be even a trivial matter, whatever they want and desire to get, they'll basically try to find sneaky ways to get to what they want, and they will bend the narrative and they will bend the truth in order to basically get to what they want. They are sneaky, they are treacherous, they will find and seize any moment to betray. And that person is a person of hellfire. When no matter the slightest moment that they find a slightest window to betray, to sneak, they'll seize that moment. And that's a person of hellfire. And a person, ورجل لا يصبح ولا يمسي إلا وهو يخادعك عن أهلك ومالك. And a person that whenever they wake up, whenever they sleep, in other words, whether night comes or day comes, that they would always be يخادعك. They would always be sneaking. They would always be cheating in your family and even on your money. They would not be honest. And He had also mentioned al-bukhl, الشنظير الفحاش. I want you to look at this. Al-bukhl, al-kadhib, being stingy, liars, and الشنظير الفحاش. What is a shanzir? A person that uses and is, as always, one, in their behavior, they're illicit in their behavior and illicit in their words. They would use words that are, probably seen as cool, but they would use words that are illicit words. And they would think that, oh, it's because I got angry. That's not acceptable. The Prophet ﷺ called him shinzir, to use these kind of words that are containing profanity. And that would be basically haram, and certainly that would be the person that would be included in hellfire. Now we could see that this hadith is on Sahih Muslim, so therefore this hadith is authentic. A lot to say about that, so I'll just leave it here because I don't want to end up just going into this hadith and then forgetting, the ayat that we were working on. All right, let's continue right there. The other note that that al-Qurtubi wanted to talk about, remember he said that he had 2 points in regards to this ayah, and he said that there are 2 mas'alatin. There are 2 matters that he wanted to discuss. The first one was haraj. The second one was basically right there, the word dhikra. The second one was dhikra. So when you look at the word dhikra, certainly, I don't want to go in details with the different debates in regards to the grammatical part of speech, but in general, of course, is dhikra to mean that this belongs to basically فلا يكن, does it belong to this verb? In other words, this is belonging to this verb, or is it لتنذر and ذكرى together? Basically, I don't want to get you within that grammatical debate. I'll say it that way. But in the end, we could see that, to make the story short, that ذكرى, that al-inzar was for the disbelievers, and the dhikra, or the reminder, was for the believers, because they're the ones that are benefiting from it. They're the ones that are benefiting basically from the reminder, and also benefiting from the warning, because they embrace the Quran. اتبعوا ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم ولا تتبعوا من دونه أولياء قليلا ما تذكرون. And I want you to look at this one. So remember this hadith that we had just done right there, and we said that when he said that وَإِنِّي خَلَقْتُ عِبَادِي حُنَفَاءَ كُلَّهُم, created all my people and all my servants basically hunafa, and then the shayateen came in, separated them from their deen, and then what did they do? Well, they changed their culture, and let them halalize what was haram and what was regarded haram. Well, that's the same thing that actually relates to these ayat. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the Quran, and it is definitely an indhar and a reminder. But then, how do I make this reminder for the believers? How do we maintain this to be a reminder, something that will keep me vigilant, keep me aware, keep me basically in an area where I'm completely awakened? How do I stay in a position where I am awakened at all times and not living like some kind of a 2-person when I'm in a haraqa and basically speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. But then when I'm probably living my life, I all of a sudden become a different person. How do I stay vigilant of my faith? How do I stay awakened? How do I stay steadfast? That's when that ayah says, اتبعوا ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم, and follow what was revealed upon you from your Lord Almighty. So what is this talking about? Like, if it says اتبعوا ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم, is this just talking about the Quran? We're going to get there. ولا تتبعوا من دونه أولياء, and do not follow outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as awliya. Wait a minute, so what is awliya again? The root is waliya. The word waliya, it can mean, maybe we could write it down right there. The root waliya, let's write it down, waliya. And it can mean authority. Let's write it down. Can mean authority. Authority, okay? And the word waliya could also mean support. And the word waliya could also mean something that is your place of decision making. You would basically turn to them in whether we're speaking about resources, so decision making, whether we're speaking about resource, or whether we're talking about a center. That's awliya. What is your center? What is your place of support? What is your area of authority? That's al-awliya. So when the ayah says, اتبعوا ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم, follow what was revealed upon you from your Lord Almighty, that would basically include what? That would basically include al-kitab and the sunnah. It would include Quran, and it would include sunnah. Why would it include sunnah? Where did you bring that up from? Okay, because the ayah itself says, remember, when you want to make a Quran translation or Quran interpretation, you cannot take one ayah and then leave the rest, because the Quran يفسر بعضه بعضا. Quran interprets the different ayat, they would interpret another ayah. So in order to interpret one ayah, you need to see another ayah to help you understand the meaning right, and not necessarily make your own meaning or your own interpretation or your own explanation that is separate from the context of the other ayat with it. So what is the evidence that this is sunnah then, or including sunnah? Well, the ayah in Surah Al-Hashr, it says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا, and take what the Prophet himself had come with in terms of revelation, in terms of teachings. So revelation is al-wahi. Teachings is the implementation of what the Prophet ﷺ had implemented in wahi and explained how we would live it on ground. That's sunnah. So whether we're speaking about ما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه, whether we're speaking about the revelation that was sent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the practices that explain the revelation / sunnah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you take it, and whatever He had commanded you or prohibited you from doing, then you would have to فَانْتَهُوا, then stay and keep away from. In other words, commandments you embrace, prohibitions you basically separate yourself away from, or you do not do. All right, now here, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاء. Hold on, before we get to that one, let's see. And another group of scholars, when he says قَالَتْ فِرْقَةٌ, this is talking about different scholars, that this is basically a matter that is inclusive and includes the Prophet ﷺ and includes the nation, the Muslim nation as well. And he said, and from what it appears, this is his explanation now, he said, and from what it appears, that this is a discourse that is inclusive to all the people. And it's not necessarily just to the Prophet ﷺ, and therefore, what then is the inference? What then does that mean? Follow the religion of Islam and Quran and practice the halal piece of it and whatever is regarded as prohibited, take that as what is considered unethical, or what is considered as unacceptable, or what is considered as not an area that is permissible for you to practice. وَامْتَثِلُوا أَمْرَهُ, and embrace its orders and avoid whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically prohibited. And of course, I want you to look at this sentence. وَدَلَّتِ الْآيَةُ عَلَى تَرْكِ اتِّبَاعِ الْآرَاءِ مَعْ وُجُودِ النَّصِّ فِيهِ. Period. This is a statement that is extremely important. Said, and what this indicates, this ayah indicates that it is important to على ترك الآراء, to avoid and leave out all the different opinions whenever there is a text. What does that mean? So I'm not supposed to follow the differences of opinions? No. If there is a direct text in the Quran or Sunnah, and other people wanted to interpret or probably give a different interpretation, maybe call it metaphor, maybe call it this and that, at the end, follow the text and leave out all of those differences. When we say differences, we're not talking about differences of opinions in interpreting the text, but we're talking about the differences of opinions that are not credible. So there are differences of opinions that are credible and differences of opinions that are not credible. Certainly, a credible difference of opinion is basically something that other scholars had considered it as a valid difference of opinion, and as a valid statement that the text itself is inclusive to such an interpretation. But an interpretation that is outside of what scholars had endorsed, that this is what the text can hold, would basically be considered as this ترك اتباع الآراء, to leave those statements if there's no evidence and the text does not support such an interpretation, then leave all those differences of opinions. Yesterday, I was with, forgot what they were called, but it was a meeting with some organization, and they were talking about what I think is impacting whether the lack of alimas, female scholars, or whether the alimas sometimes going deviant, okay, at least, or going towards the wrong direction. I said it's two things. Number one is that the resources that women had were lacking. Certainly, we are seeing more women get into misconceptions and fall into misconceptions than men. Part of the reasons to that is basically women not having the resources to learn their Islam, whether they're not coming to the masjid frequently, or whether the resources to teach Islam is basically not as available, or even what is available is usually very shallow. Even when they would be teaching Islam, it's usually very surface, not respecting the women's minds to let them learn Islam in detail and in thorough ilm. So we have to recognize that one of the reasons of why we basically see many women fall in the fitna, one of the reasons is lacking ilm. Because they would get confused, as because they may lack ilm, they would find themselves getting confused. Is this a credible and a valid difference of opinion? Or is this a difference of opinion to mean that is completely separated away from what scholars had considered as credible? And that's why we're doing this thorough tafsir in order to create this foundation amongst the sisters where they are learning the tafsir, they are learning their Islam in thorough details in order to make sure that we recognize the resources, what's a valid opinion, what's not a valid opinion, how do I scrutinize these opinions, how do I know the resources, how do I understand my resources, because the second we don't know the resources, then we start confusing our channels, we start confusing our minds, we start confusing our interpretations, then we get lost in these narratives, and we're then confused which one is valid and which one is not valid. So for a Muslim that is aware of their Islam, this ayah, like al-Qurtubi said, دلت الآية على ترك اتباع الآراء مع وجود النص فيه. Or another term, لا اجتهاد في مورد النص. Whenever there is a text that is clear, there's no way that we can somehow say, well, I've got my own ijtihad. I've got my own reading on this. I've got my own way of interpreting this. There's no ijtihad. There's no self-interpretation whenever I would have a text that's saying one thing. Okay, let's see. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ. And do not follow other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the wali. Or do not follow other awliya other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so what does al-awliya actually mean? So the dunihi, outside or less than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So dun actually means less. In other words, anything that is outside or anything that is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one, an authority, or as a support, or as a resource, or as a center, or as your place of decision making, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's going to be less. وَلَا يَعْلُو فَوْقَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing that goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, that is the authority that as a Muslim you want to turn to, because nothing goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not any authority, no matter political power, maybe even social, let's say social power. Yes, sometimes the culture may sometimes be in a certain place of power, and not in any not any place of support outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not be afraid. And certainly no one's decision making and no one's basically opinion goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No resource goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no center goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No center goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center, then everything else falls basically down. That's the relationship. That's the relationship that a Muslim would carry, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my resource. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my center. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my place of support. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my place of authority. So therefore, I would regard embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my area of centricity. My area of centricity. So anything that goes beyond, because anything that goes outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this ayah basically says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا. But what does the word تَتَّبِعُوا mean? Why did it say وَلَا تَتَّبَعُوا, not تَتَّبِعُوا? Now, what does that mean? So the root is تَبِعَ. That's the root for the word تَتَّبِعُوا. Hold on. What does the word تَبِعَ actually mean? We're going to write that down. تَبِعَ. The word تَبِعَ actually means to follow. The word tabi'a can also mean to trace. The word tabi'a could also mean to be considerate in following. So let's say you're seeing somebody's footsteps, and you're putting your footstep over their footstep and then trying to basically take them as basically your place of leadership. Okay. Well, maybe I shouldn't say tabi'a to mean leadership, because it doesn't necessarily mean leadership. So we'll just leave it at follow and trace. But when you see the word تتبعوا and the word تبعا, and what do we add here in order to make it tatta? That would basically mean we've got a shadda. What does the shadda mean whenever I would have it in a word? What is a shadda? The shadda is basically, where's that shadda right there? This is the little shadda right there. You see it? Okay, this is the shadda right there. Whenever you would see a shadda, it basically has a couple meanings. Number one meaning, we're speaking about consistency. Number two, we're speaking about pattern. Number three, we're speaking about some level of shidda, some level of shidda is like to be determined. Okay, and sometimes the shidda can mean a gradual process. Okay, got 5 different meanings right there. There's more, but you can just start out with that. So what does that mean? When you say لا تتبعوا, this is to let us know that following, tracing, or maybe in today's terms, trending, what would be a trend, and basically following a certain trend, because it basically, one, there's a pattern. Two, there's a certain mimicking something. Three, there's a gradual process. In the beginning, you're not really understanding it fully, but then later on, you basically start understanding it. You start becoming part of it. You normalize it, and then you become part of it, and then it becomes who you are. So when you look at that tabi'u, just realize that it starts out as a gradual process, then it becomes a pattern, then it becomes basically what you follow as a center, what you follow as a behavior, what you follow basically in your embracement, and then you start tracing that path and you start looking for ways to fit in. And that becomes your area without you realizing your area of centricity. That becomes your resource. That becomes the pattern, or at least the culture that determines your decision making. That becomes your area of support, because hey, you want to go for a coffee, you basically would get them to basically be there to hang out with you, etc. That becomes your place of authority. That becomes your area of authority, the area of power, the area that determines a lot about what your identity is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, well, for you as a believer, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهَا أَوْلِيَاءَ. Do not follow other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as basically those items that we had said earlier. Basically follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make sure you follow all of that to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So he said, walha, that is al-Qurtubi said, and he said, walha, which ha is he talking about? Hold on, let's look into it. Which ha is he talking about? We're talking about this ha right there. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ, this pronoun ha. Who is it referring to? Do not follow outside other than dunihi, not dunaha or duniha, min dunihi, outside of him, other than him. Who is him referring to? Allah Almighty. Well, wait a minute. Why is it giving it a masculine pronoun and not a feminine pronoun, or maybe a pronoun that is perhaps a plural pronoun? Why is it saying وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ? Now, there are a number of different reasons. Number one is that in Lugha Arabiya, things that may not have, or let's say, do not necessarily have a gender, may sometimes be given the masculine pronoun. That's number one. Number two is that things that are with a masculine pronoun in Lugha Arabiya, it can also mean to give honor to something. All right? It is to give honor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we had revealed the Quran as a Arabi, as a book of a Quran that is revealed in the Arabic language. Therefore, if you want to fully understand the Quran, you would basically have to go to one, the Lugha Arabiya with its basically semantics, with its grammar, with its etymology, with its conjugation, everything. It's going to go back to the Lugha Arabiya and how basically the structure of Lugha Arabiya works, and that's how you're going to look through that lens to understand the Quran. You're not going to be creating your own interpretation based on a different language, but you're going to be using the Lugha Arabiya. Okay, so number one is that goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what that would mean is that do not worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just the worship piece of it? Or is it more than that? When you say worship, like Ibn Taymiyyah explained, is more than a ritual that you would do as a spiritual type of a place of worship. It is farther than that, because Ibn Taymiyyah explained it is what your heart basically embraces. In other words, liking or disliking something. 2, it's what your words would say. And 3, it's what behaviors and actions your body is basically doing. Remember Surah Al-Hujurat, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لَوْ يُطِيعُكُمْ فِي كَثِيرٍ مِنْ الْأَمْرِ لَعَنِتُّمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانِ. That's the first foundation of Iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Iman lovable to you. زَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ, made all the details beautiful to you. So you would find anything that Islam teaches is beautiful to your heart. And number 3, you would separate yourself from the culture of kufr, كَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ. And you would basically separate yourself away from kufr, away from disbelief, away from fusuq, and fusuq is major sin, and al-isyan is minor sin. So what do you embrace? You embrace a culture, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الرَّاشِدُونَ. Those are the people that are basically finding guidance and finding the right path. All right. وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا مَنْ عَدَلَ عَنْ دِينِ اللَّهِ وَلِيًّا. And it would do not take anybody that is عَدَلَ عَنْ دِينِ اللَّهِ. What does عَدَلَ عَنْ? عَدَلَ عَنْ means separated themselves or took a different path away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not take them as wali. Well, but I'm just friends with them. It doesn't mean I'm following everything. Why should I not take them as friends? Because the ayah says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا. When you follow, we're speaking about whether following them in spending time with them, or whether we're speaking like them, or we're following them on Facebook, or following them on social media, or following them in anything, or whether we are listening to them, or whether we're asking them for advice. All of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, these people, don't take these people as your place of your place of following whatsoever. Don't take them as the example. Don't take them as the role model. Don't take them as your authority. Don't take them as the ones that you would turn to for decision making. Don't take them as your place of center whatsoever. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ. And certainly that would mean do not take those that would not take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their center, as basically your wali. Don't let them be your place of wilaya. Don't let them be your place of authority. And whoever وَكُلُّ مَنْ رَضِيَ مَذْهَبًا فَأَهْلُ ذَلِكَ الْمَذْهَبِ أَوْلِيَاؤُهُ. Period. Whoever embraces any path, any culture, any cult, whatever it is, then those group of people, أهل ذلك المذهب, then those people that are belonging to that trend, that path, that culture, that religion, that cult, whatever it is, then those are going to be the people that are considered their awliya, their supporters. This actually reminds me of Surah Al-Insan. Surah Al-Insan. Let's go to it really quick. Surah Al-Insan. I'm going to go to it really quick. Where is it? Hold on. Let's find it. Right there. Let's go to Surah Al-Insan for a bit. Why? Because it takes us into that point. Let's see. إنا نحن نزلنا عليك القرآن تنزيلا فاصبر لحكم ربك ولا تطع منهم آثما أو كفورا واذكر اسم ربك بكرة وأصيلا. Wow, it falls right into the text and the context that we're talking about. We had revealed the Quran upon you, and therefore be patient in embracing the orders of your Lord Almighty, and do not follow those that are of sin and those that are of disbelief. And remember the name of your Lord throughout the night, throughout the day and throughout the night. And throughout the night, prostrate to your Lord Almighty and glorify Him throughout the night, throughout the long nights. For those people, they love al-ajila. They want to rush desire, and they would leave behind a day that is loaded and heavy. We had created them, and we had fastened their creation, and if we willed, we would have changed them to a new generation, a new creation. This is a reminder, and whoever wills shall take the path of their Lord Almighty. Ya Allah, Wallahi al-Azim, as if I'm reading it for the first time. Ya Rabbi. Ya Allah. All right. Ya Allah. Okay, so we're just going to finish up to here, and then we'll continue tomorrow, inshallah. Malik ibn Dinar. You know, I should actually talk about Malik ibn Dinar. It's one of those tabi'een, or tabi'een, if I'm not mistaken. He wasn't a sahabi. When he read, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ, he said, وَلَا تَطْلُبُوا. He said, and do not ask for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as basically, do not ask them for advice, do not ask them for support, do not ask them for basically as a resource or a center. Then at the end, Malik ibn Dinar. Who's Malik ibn Dinar? Inshallah, we'll probably try to talk about him tomorrow, inshallah. We'll try talking about him tomorrow, inshallah. Malik ibn Dinar is actually a very famous zahid. What is a zahid? A zuhd is, I mean, if you were to go back to the dictionary or the, translation, it would give you an ascetic. But an ascetic in Eastern religions is really, you would think of it as a monk, but this isn't necessarily like that. And zahid, they can be rich, but zahid meaning that they lived seeking akhirah, not dunya. They lived in a strong spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Why is it قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ? Very few people are actually going to be reminded of this, or is this very few people are actually committed to following the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Certainly, yes, very few people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that would be reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that would always take the Quran as a dhikra, as something that we would follow, as something that we would embrace, as something that we would take as authority, as decision making, as our place and as a place of center in our life, and as our place of repetition and reminder, and as something that we would continuously and are constant in always remembering the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions, let's see here. The sister is saying, so when it comes to interpretation, you can use an ayah from a different surah. For example, or evidence from or even Sunnah. Yes, certainly, this is how tafsir is done. Tafsir is done, number one, Quran through Quran. That's the best interpretation, that you would go to other ayah to interpret this ayah. Number two, then you would use Sunnah. You would use Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ's explanations, or the Prophet ﷺ's explanations, whether in action or whether in words or whether in description or whether in reportings that were done by the Sahaba about the Prophet ﷺ. Number three, or number four, you would also then get to the other resource for tafsir is basically going back to the Sahaba. How did they interpret it? What did they understand? And number five, then you would go to the Lugha Arabiya in the Arabic language and then explain it through the lens of Arabic language. So that's how we basically would do tafsir. Let's see, the sister is saying, can you reiterate the point about the statement? So if there was no evidence, you leave differences of opinions because there was no valid opinion. Okay. So when we speak about the differences of opinions between scholars, we're speaking about the valid differences of opinions, meaning that the text itself, they might have differences of opinions in interpreting that particular statement based on based on their reading of a hadith, their reading of an ayah, or their reading of Lugha Arabiya, and it is within that realm. It's not outside. So I'll give you an example. You had the ayat, for example, describing Jannah, was describing it that there are grape trees, that there are basically hur'in, okay? Hur'in, the Prophet ﷺ described it as, well, this is talking about certain women in Jannah. All right. Then you had these people that said, no, we don't want Islam to be a religion that is describing Jannah as a place of lust and women and all of that. So they thought that they were doing Islam a favor, and they said Hur'in is basically nothing but vines of grapes. That's not what the ayat were talking about. No, it was literally talking about certain beautiful women in Jannah. And where did they get that from? They said, well, in Syriac language, the word hur, it basically means, and in, it basically means vines of grapes. Well, we're going to say, well, wait a minute. In Syriac language, this is not a Syriac Quran for you to use another language to interpret what the Arabic language is saying in the Quran. And they will say, well, Arabic and Syriac are both Semitic languages, then therefore they go to the same roots, then therefore why can't we benefit from that and be inclusive? We'll say, oh, that's not how the Prophet ﷺ interpreted that. That's not what the ayat are describing in details. لَمْ يَطْمِثْهُنَّ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ. All this isn't talking about somebody taking a bite of some kind of grape. This is talking about women. All right. So this is just an example. All right. And right now we're seeing a lot of people basically fall within these misconceptions because they basically do not have the ilm, whether in Lugha Arabiya, or whether we're speaking about Sunnah, whether we're speaking about Quran and the details of that. So in other words, the lack of resource in Islamic studies is basically one main reason why we see a lot of Muslims fall in various misconceptions. This is my take on that. So this is trying to explain it. Let's see, okay, this is it. So mashallah, we have a good turnout. We had a very good turnout, mashallah. Very proud of everybody that is here. And inshallah, if there are any questions right now before I turn the live stream off, go ahead. No one wants to be on the live. So the issue is the lack of resource and ilm. Yes, I really believe that one main reason why a lot of the misconceptions are out there